Thank you very, very much for this opportunity to speak with you. I'm sorry that I will not be speaking in Spanish, but I will do my best to make the presentation clear, and hopefully we will have time for some conversations and questions afterward. It has been a great pleasure to be in Chile for the last week. My wife and I have been here and have enjoyed Santiago very, very much. Unfortunately, it rained the day that we were going to try to go up to the mountains, so that was only means that I have to come back. Today I would like to speak about research we have been doing on the interactions between teachers and children. I will be speaking mostly about interactions between teachers and younger children in preschools and kindergartens, but almost all of what I will talk about applies in research we have done all the way up into high schools and with older children. So this morning we will talk about the experiences that are offered for social and cognitive development in classrooms for young children. We will talk about how to measure those experiences and how those experiences contribute to children's outcomes. We will talk about whether observations and observational tools can be used to improve the qualities of interactions for teachers and children, and that in ways that actually also improve student learning. So we'll be focusing on describing, on measuring, and on improving interactions between teachers and children. In the United States, we have spent a great amount of time and money over the course of the last 20 years in expanding access to preschools particularly for poor children. I think this is the case in most countries, that poor children come to school much farther behind their peers and struggle. And in the United States, despite our investments in Head Start and in preschools, children are still coming to school behind. So all of our investments have not been successful in helping close the learning gaps between poor children and non-poor children. So even as we have promoted universal access to preschool, these learning gaps still exist, and we need to be thinking about the ways that we ensure that the opportunities that children have in classrooms are sufficiently intense, educationally and developmentally, to close learning gaps. So many of our classrooms are not stimulating enough for children's learning, and is one of the reasons why they don't learn as much as they need to. We believe that interactions between teachers and children are the ingredient that fosters development. The things that teachers do with children are the ways that that we stimulate knowledge and we stimulate skills in classrooms. And so by focusing on interactions, we become able to increase the quality of children's experience. And we believe that we should be promoting not only access to educational programs, but to ensuring that those programs also have sufficient quality. So in our point of view, interactions are the way that one gets to a quality program. Okay. Got a little bit ahead of myself here. Okay, so we will talk a little bit about the theoretical basis for this work, and it really derives from work that has been done on parent-child interactions, where we learned from that developmental psychology research that the early history of relationships with adults are very, very important, and that parents and interactions with parents contribute a great deal to children's learning before they get to school. So the children are really, in some sense, very sensitive to the qualities of interactions that they have with adults, and parents are those first adults. And what we've learned from those is that parents' interactions with children contribute to many of the ways children are successful in school. They contribute to how children get along with other children. They contribute to self-regulation and emotional control, and to how children learn how to follow directions and persist. So these features of children's skills are the products of the interactions that they have with parents before they get to school, and the products of interactions that they have with their care providers. So these relationships are very, very important, particularly relationships with teachers as they get to school. Relationships with teachers become very, very important because those relationships then begin to take on a similar role in promoting children's learning and development. Our focus in our research has been to not only study and describe interactions, but to use standardized observational assessments of teacher-child interactions to do large-scale descriptions of the quality of interactions and improve those interactions. So that's what I'm going to spend most of the talk focusing on. So I've talked a little bit about teacher-child interactions and how they matter. I'll describe now some research that we have been doing for the last decade. And we have the starting point for our research has been to describe interactions in what we call three broad domains of support. Emotional support. These are the kinds of behaviors that teachers display that make children feel safe and secure, and make the classroom a positive emotional place for children to be, a positive climate. Teachers also organize the classroom through their interactions. They organize children's attention, they organize behavior, they organize time, they organize activity. So there are ways in which teachers' behaviors provide organizational support to children's learning. And then there are behaviors that teachers display that we call instructional support that really involve how teachers stimulate children's thinking and cognition. What are the kinds of behaviors that teachers engage in that create opportunities for children to learn concepts and to build their language development and skills. Those are the kinds of things that we call instructional support. We measure these interactions using a tool we call the Classroom Assessment Scoring System, which is a tool for observing and evaluating the qualities of interactions. And we will go to a classroom and we will train an observer, and that observer will be trained and go into a classroom, and we'll assign a rating from 1 at the low end to 7 on the high end regarding various dimensions of interactions that they observe between the teacher and the child. And I'll talk about these in a moment. So the observer is watching, taking notes, making many detailed observations, and then assigning a rating from 1 to 7. So one might be in one particular classroom and the teacher is very warm and very engaging and very loving of the students, and that teacher might receive a very high score, a 6 or a 7, on emotional support. Might be in a different classroom where the teacher is more reserved, perhaps even a little harsh toward the children, and they're irritated, and that teacher might receive a lower score, a 2 or a 3 on emotional support. Okay, so that's how that works. Some people think that you should not be putting numbers on what teachers do with children, that this is too complicated to assign numbers, and we have worked very hard to demonstrate that One can do this very, very consistently and with great deal of integrity and fidelity and transparency, and that the scores themselves are useful in helping describe teachers' behavior, and actually, the way I'll show you, begin to help improve teachers' behavior and improve students' learning. So we use the class in many ways for teachers' professional development, for research, and for promoting learning. So on the right side of this slide, you will see those three broad domains: emotional support, organizational support, and instructional support. And I mentioned that we make ratings 1 to 7, and we make those ratings on those what we call dimensions of interaction that are running down the left side of the slide. So that when watching for emotional support, we are watching specific behaviors that the teacher will be demonstrating that indicate the positive emotional climate. We'll assign 1 to 7. We'll watch behaviors that indicate a negative climate, assign a 1 to 7. We'll look at the degree to which the teacher displays sensitive behavior toward the children. Does she look at the children and read their cues and respond to their cues in a timely way so that children don't get upset or frustrated? And that we will score that. And then we will also pay attention to the ways in which the teacher's interactions indicate that she understands that the children have a particular point of view, that the children have a perspective in the classroom, and that would also be assigned a rating. In organizational support, we pay attention to the teacher's effective management of the children's behavior. Some classrooms we go into and it's orderly, the children understand that there are rules, the teachers will be responding to the children in a way that keep them guided, and they'll receive a high score. Or you will go into a classroom in which everything's kind of chaos, and the teacher may be yelling and the children are a little out of control. That would be a low score on effective behavior management. We also look at the way the teachers provide children good instructional activities that allow them to be interested and engaged. And then we also look at the way the time is used productively in the classroom. Do children, are they busy and are given something to do all the time? That's a productive classroom. Or are the children waiting around a lot and just kind of wandering around, have nothing to do, and don't really know what to be doing? That would be a low productive classroom. Then finally, in instructional support, we pay attention to the ways in which teachers promote the children's thinking and concept development. So does the teacher only focus on whether children are learning facts, like letters and numbers, or is the teacher trying to help the children understand what the meaning of those numbers and letters are, or the meaning of vocabulary words, so that the children develop some thinking skills, aside from just rote learning. We also look at the way in which teachers provide children feedback. The teachers only focus on right, wrong, yes, no, or do they help the children understand and lead the children to a more sophisticated and complicated level of performance? And then we pay attention to how rich the teacher's language is with the children. Do they engage the children in conversations and storytelling back and forth together? So those are the dimensions that we pay attention to. And if you were trained on the class, then you would see that each dimension is within a domain. So emotional support, the dimension that we would be looking at would be teacher sensitivity if we were making scores, and that the behaviors of teacher sensitivity would be described in great detail. And if you were learning how to use the class, you would learn all of those detailed behaviors, and you would also learn the ways in which they are indicated at the low end, where you would assign low ratings, and the way they were indicated at the high end, and you would assign high ratings. We have many videotapes that have already been scored, and so people learn how to use this by watching the videotapes, reading the manual, and getting so that they align their view of the videotapes to our view of the videotapes and get experience using the manual. Okay, so that's how we describe interactions, and that's how we begin to measure them in a regular, standardized way. We have now trained over 30,000 people all across the world to use the class, and to use the class very consistently. So it's very important that if one were to go about using this, that you would be trained to use it, and so that scores can be given consistently and interpreted consistently. Okay, so we have now done many studies with the class, and in one of the studies we have data from about 10,000 classrooms in the United States. These would be pre-K to third grade classrooms, so the children 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all across the country. And what we find here is that for emotional support, if we're looking at low ratings, 1 and 2, or high ratings, 6 and 7, almost all the classrooms cluster around here, which is about a 5. That means those classrooms, in general, that the classrooms in the United States are pretty nice places for kids to hang out. They're socially warm and engaging in general, and they're accepting. In terms of organization, we see a little bit lower level, a moderate level, but again, mostly pretty well organized. But what we see when we look at the teacher's cognitive stimulation of children is that it's very low. This is on average a 2. And we see this in most United States classrooms. We see this in most classrooms actually across the country, and across other countries as well. So when we've done this work, for example, some of the data from Chile are consistent with this. We see data from Turkey, from Australia, from Germany, that's pretty consistent with this. What this means is that in many of these classrooms, teachers are either not actively teaching children, so the children are kind of just wandering around the classroom without instruction, or when teachers do offer instruction, it's very focused on only children learning facts, and rehearsal of rote facts and rote computation, letters, numbers, those types of things. Very little concentration on children's thinking, and very little feedback that would help children learn in a deeper way. This is going to be important when we come back, because these kinds of behaviors actually turn out to be very important for promoting children's learning and achievement. Okay. So we then did a study to look at the association between the scores on the class, and in this case we looked at emotional support, and we looked at instructional support, and we looked at a couple of other indicators of the quality of the classroom. This is the Early Childhood Environment Rating Scale. This is another observation of the classroom. But instead of looking at what the teachers are doing with children, this instrument looks at the stuff that's in the classroom. Does the classroom have, are the chairs at the right height for children? Are they arranged in a particular way? Are there labels and bulletin boards in the classroom? So it's a very different way of looking at a classroom environment. And then this variable is really around aspects of the classroom environment, such as the number of children in the classroom, the degree or credentials of the teacher. And what we find here is that when looking at all these different ways of assessing children's performance, which were assessed at the beginning of the school year and again at the end of the school year, these check marks represent a significant association between that feature of the classroom and children's learning in that area. So what this means on this table is that instructional support was very, very important in contributing significantly to learning in all of these different areas. And emotional support was very important in contributing to children's social competence and lower levels of behavior problems. But that the way the physical environment of the classroom looked was not all that important, and the numbers of children and the credentials of the teachers were not all that important as well. So this is a way of demonstrating that features of interactions that were observed seem to matter quite a bit for contributing to children's learning. We then followed those very same children from the preschool year into kindergarten. And we found that, in fact, the children who were in classrooms in preschool that had higher levels of instructional support by the teacher also did better a whole year later in kindergarten when we tested those children again in kindergarten. So it was like if you had a good stimulating preschool teacher, you did well in preschool and you learned more in preschool, and you also learned more in kindergarten, okay? Regardless of how good your kindergarten teacher might have been. And in fact, it was also true that the instructional support by the kindergarten teacher was also a very important feature of children's learning. So what we see here is evidence that interactions matter in one year for that year. They seem to also matter for the next year, and that the effect can be cumulative, year after year after year. Okay, I'm going to skip that point. Okay. We've also done work to try to understand the ways in which interactions may be more important for children who come from backgrounds where they may be struggling a little bit more in terms of family resources or their own, the children's own skills and abilities. And so I want to show you a couple different studies that we did in this particular way. So we looked at children when they went to first grade, and we rated the first grade teachers' instructional support as low, moderate, and high. And we looked at the reading test gains of the children over the course of the year. We did this for two groups of children. One group where the mother had a very low level of education, and another group where the mother had a higher level of education. And when the children from the higher level of education group came to school, they performed about the same across all those different levels of teachers' instructional support. So it looked in this graph that instructional support didn't really matter much for their reading gains. But when we look at the other group of children, we see very big differences in their reading gains according to the level of instructional support that the teacher displayed. So for the children from low education families, if they were fortunate enough to get in a classroom in which the teacher was high on instructional support, they learned the same amount, showed the same level of gains as the children from the higher education families. But for those same groups of children, if you ended up in a classroom where the teacher displayed low levels of instructional support, there was a big gap between the learning that they showed and the learning that the other children showed. So this is a way in which we see the learning gap closing or the learning gap increasing based upon the level of instructional support that the teacher shows. I thought I had another slide. Okay. We see that, we see this particular pattern very often, where children who have some sort of vulnerability perform almost the same as children who do not have that vulnerability if they are in a classroom with a teacher that is stimulating and sensitive and who we rate high on the quality of interactions. And the children who show the vulnerability but end up in a classroom where the teacher is not stimulating, those children fall further behind. So we see this over and over and over again with different indicators of vulnerability and different indicators of the classroom environment and different outcomes. It's a pattern we see very often. Okay, another study we've done is also to look at teachers and children's stress in the classroom. And so we have found that for most young children to be in a child care, preschool, or kindergarten classroom, over the course of the day, they show higher levels of a stress hormone called cortisol. So it means their physiological system is under stress because of the classroom environment. However, when teachers display sensitivity in their behavior toward children, we see that stress decreases over the course of the day. Okay, so what is normally and typically an increasingly stressful circumstance for children in terms of their physiology becomes less stressful when teachers are sensitive. So this is teachers' behavior making a difference in the children's physiological responses. And we know from research that cortisol, the hormone here, actually has a big impact on brain development. And so this is a way in which teachers have a direct impact on the ways that the body is working and the way that the brain is developing. We also know that when teachers are stressed, that they create a more challenging circumstance in the classroom for children. And in fact, when they are stressed, that reduces the value of their interactions for children's learning. We created an intervention to work with a teacher and a child together to help the teacher and the child play more effectively together, for the teacher to be more sensitive and for the child to pay more attention to the activity together. We did this with teachers and children who they were having difficulties with. And we found that in that intervention, which really focused on helping the teacher read the child's cues, that we saw a decrease in cortisol for both the teacher and the child, so that as teachers learned to be more sensitive and learned to read the child's cues when they were playing together, both the teacher and the child's stress went down. Okay, so these can be very, very important interventions, not only for helping teachers feel more effective and behave more effectively, but can be important interventions for changing the physiology that underlies learning. And we find that in this intervention, we saw increases in children's positive behaviors as well. So, interactions matter, and they matter a lot for the teacher, and they matter a lot for the children. And at the core of these interactions is what we call responsive teaching. Okay, we think that one of the things that's in common across all features of interactions are teachers' ability to read children's cues, to detect children's cues, to respond to children's cues, and to be actively engaged with children. That's really what's at the core of all of those dimensions of the class. So that when we look at the class and all these dimensions that we rate from 1 to 7 that I was just talking about, or that we talk about these domains, one of the things that all of these things have in common is responsive teaching. Okay, it's reading children's cues and responding to children's cues in a sensitive way. So one way to look at the class then would be to look at all of these dimensions and understand them in terms of responsivity, this idea of being a responsive teacher, someone who looks at cues and responds contingently and appropriately to cues, and who is actively engaged with children, and that some aspects also would focus on how to manage the classroom, and some aspects would also focus on how to facilitate cognition. And so when we look at the class from this perspective, from the responsive teaching perspective, we get very, very similar results that I talked about before. So children in classrooms in which teachers are responsive, they show high levels across all of those domains of the class, all of those dimensions of the class. Those children are doing well or better in almost all areas of development. Okay, that responsive teaching produces better language, better early literacy, better working memory, and better relationships with the teacher. And that other aspects of the class then also contribute, so that this higher focus on positive management and routines help children learn to control their behavior and inhibit impulses, and that when teachers facilitate cognition, we see children learning even more language and even learning more out in their early literacy. So this is just another way of thinking about interactions and using the class and thinking of it in terms of these other areas of teaching. And we see again that when we look at it from these perspectives, these areas of interactions are also contributing to all areas of children's learning. So interactions matter. But it's also important that children get consistent support. Okay, so it's not just a matter of having effective interactions for a particular lesson, but it's important that children receive consistently positive interactions over the course of the day. And in fact, we've seen a number of examples in which the consistency of teachers' emotional support over the course of the day predicts better social functioning and lower stress. So that, because some teachers will vary across the day. They'll be supportive at one point in the day, and then at another point in the day they'll get kind of upset and be more negative, and then they'll bounce. They kind of bounce back and forth a little bit over the course of the day. Or a child may go to one teacher that's very, very warm, and then have another teacher later in the day that is not so warm and supportive. And so that consistency, to get a consistent experience of emotional support seems particularly important for development and for lowering stress among younger children. The other question that we have had often, we have this in the United States a lot of times, is whether the kinds of interactions that we measure with the class are important for all groups of children. So we have the United States, as you well know, has most of the instruction in the course of preschool, kindergarten, first grade is in English, and yet we have a large number of young children moving into the schools, have been in the schools for a long time, that are coming from Spanish-speaking homes particularly, and so they're coming in as dual language learners. They're learning two languages. So it's really important for us to understand whether interactions are also important for those dual language learners, because we want to make sure that the kinds of things that we are assessing are important for all children, not just the English language speaking children. And so we looked at this question in a very large study of children in the federal Head Start program. So we looked at it for a group of dual language learners, Spanish-speaking children predominantly who were learning English, and English-speaking children. And we found that basically we found the exact same results for both the English language learning students and the dual language students that basically said the same pattern of results I just described, that interactions are important. They're important for both groups of children, and in fact, teachers' emotional support and instructional support for dual language learners are just as important for those children as they are for the English-speaking children. So we see this. This was reported in a couple in one of our studies, and actually has been replicated by other colleagues. Okay, so to summarize, interactions are they matter. That consistency is important. And there's evidence that interactions are important for many, many different groups of children. So I want to talk now a little bit about improving interactions and their value for children. So we specifically that have, over the course of the last 10 years, tried to develop professional development supports for teachers that would help them improve the qualities of their interactions with children. We used the class as the basis for the professional development activity. So if the idea here being that if interactions are important and the class helps us see and measure and describe interactions, then if I'm working with you as a teacher, I would like to help promote your skills in demonstrating the kinds of interactions that we would rate as high on the class. So the class becomes kind of a focus or a target for professional development. We do that in a couple of different ways. We have a video library that has examples of what these behaviors look like. We coach teachers about their interactions with children, and we actually have developed a college course about interactions and help people do observation and analysis of interactions. And we've tested all these in experiments because we want to be able to be clear that, this professional development that we've developed actually does produce gains for teachers and for children. So I've talked a lot about interactions, I've talked a lot about the dimensions of the class, but you might think, well, what does this really mean? What does sensitivity look like? Or what does behavior management look like? And I could take you to a video library, which you could then see very short video clips of a teacher, from a real teacher, from a real classroom with a real child. And we would describe very clearly in very, very great detail what that teacher in that clip is doing to display sensitivity toward that child. Okay? So what we're trying to do with the video library is to give people very clear ideas about what effective interactions look like using the class as the language and the lens for that description. So this description really draws from the class as the definition for sensitive behavior. We have found actually that if you take inexperienced teachers who have maybe 1 year of teaching experience, almost no years of teaching experience, and you just let them look at examples of effective teaching, that they become more effective teachers and their children learn more. Very, very cheap intervention. Just let these teachers see what effective practice looks like. And we developed another way of coaching teachers over the internet about their behaviors. And so this coaching program we call My Teaching Partner, and it works like the teacher will take a video of herself in the classroom. Sometimes that video is on as simple as a smartphone. Sometimes we capture the video with an iPad. We're doing a project right now in Ecuador where we're capturing the video with an iPad, sometimes with a camera. The teacher takes the video of herself teaching. She sends that video to her coach. Her coach looks at that video and pulls out clips of the teacher's practice, 3 clips of the teacher from the video, very short clips, writes a piece of feedback to the teacher about her behavior on each one of those clips. The coach then puts the clip and the feedback up on the internet for the teacher to see, and then the teacher and the coach talk about what the coach has seen once the teacher has a chance to look at it. When we've tested this coaching intervention with a group of preschool teachers, we observed their behavior starting in the beginning of the school year all the way to the end for teachers who got coaching and teachers who did not get coaching. And here we were looking at the behavior of language modeling. And for teachers who did not get coached, their behavior did not improve over the course of the year. For the teachers who were coached, their behavior improved over the course of the year. So when we coached teachers using this model, their behavior got more effective. Their interactions became more effective over the course of the year. We also looked at this particular intervention in classrooms in which all of the children were below the poverty line. So these were classrooms in which it was kind of harder to be an effective teacher. Same sort of thing, looking at behavior across the year for the control group, no coaching, and for the coaching group. And we see actually in the teachers who were not coached, their behavior actually becomes less effective over the course of the year. It's like they kind of wear out over the course of the year in terms of what they're working on with the children. The teachers who were coached got even that much more, improved even that much more. So you can see how important here the coaching was for teachers under those very hard to teach circumstances. Okay. We also have looked at the coaching in a couple of other studies. This is just a separate study where we trained coaches out in the community. Those coaches did my teaching partner coaching out in their communities. We just sat at the university and tried to help the coaches do a good job, but we were not coaching. It was local coaches. Some of you may be coaches or directors or instructional directors in that way. And using that model, we saw, again, significant gains in these aspects of the class over the course of the year. These are statistics, but basically what they mean is that teachers who were coached jumped about 1 whole point on the class over the course of the year because of the coaching. So they might have moved from a 2 to a 3, or from a 4 to a 5 over the course of the year. That's a very important move, actually, because it actually suggests that teachers are improving on the very behaviors that are hard to improve and that actually drive student achievement and learning. We also looked at, in this study, we had 15 different coaches, so we looked at the effects across 15 different coaches, because we have to try to help lots and lots of teachers. So we need lots and lots of coaches to be able to do this well. And our argument is that, for coaches to do a good job and to help a lot of teachers, we need to have a very structured program of coaching. We have to have a very programmatic approach to it, and train and support coaches to implement that. And here we see effects. These are the number of points that the teachers jumped who were coached by these different coaches. So 15 different coaches. Almost all the coaches produced gains in their teachers' practices, except one who we probably should have figured out early on and asked that coach to leave, because those teachers actually got a little worse over the course of the year. And these two teachers, the teachers in these coaches, didn't change much. But this is actually quite promising to be able to say that we could take 15 coaches and train 15 coaches to do a program in a way that got positive impacts on the vast majority of teachers, and we only had one coach that was really problematic. So we think that's very promising. And so we see that the effects of this program in preschool, that teachers who had these kind of coaches grew more effective in their interactions with children in a variety of different ways that I've illustrated here, and that importantly, the children who were in those classrooms that where teachers were being coached, those children improved considerably on their scores. Okay, so that's coaching. And then let me quickly describe a little bit about our course. We created a course, a college course, in interactions that teaches, in teacher preparation, that teaches teacher candidates about interactions and helps them build their observation skills. And we find that when we test the effects of that course, we test the effects right after the course and then a whole year later. The course focuses mostly on instructional support. The teachers show higher levels of emotional and instructional support after the course, and a whole year later, they're still showing some benefit of that, of taking that course, and that benefit shows up in their behavior in the classroom, which we think is very important. Obviously, that effect diminishes over the course of the year, and so one might then begin to think of the kinds of professional development that you could give between after the course and a year later that would keep that, that would keep that effect present. So we learned, that from administering the course, we learned that teachers did demonstrate a variety of changes, that they did change their practice, and that change was sustained almost a year later. That course was effective for all teachers, whether they were very experienced or had very little experience, and the course was able to promote better interactions, that this is a skill that can be trained. And we think that's a very important point, that our teacher preparation programs can be more effective by training some of these skills. We then have created, I'll go through these rather quickly, we then have created an online course about interactions that we now deliver completely online across a course of a couple semesters. We've seen just in early studies that teachers that are taking the course are improving a little bit. This is the end of the first course, and by the end of the second course, these are gains in teachers' practices over the course of the year, so that their instructional, emotional, and organizational support is increasing with this online course. This is not just a in-person course, it's an online course. We get even better effects when the online instructor is more involved in providing conferences and supports to the teachers. And we've now started to try to think about what makes these interventions work. What is it going on in a teacher's head that makes coaching work, that makes this video library work, that makes this course work the way it does? And we have begun to think that it's actually the skill of seeing. That these professional development interventions are training the teachers to see interactions, okay, to actually be able to observe them moment to moment. And we think that seeing actually can be the skill that transforms teaching, and that seeing is a skill that actually can be improved. So we're working now on ways of training teachers to be much better observers, and that the gains in this skill of teachers' ability to actually do these observations is a skill that seems very, very important. So we're working on ways to do that. So we're seeing that both the course and the coaching is having effects on children's school readiness. So these are not just effects on teachers' behavior in the classroom, but we see these effects on children's school readiness in areas of literacy, in areas of language development, in areas of self-regulation. We see these in the conversational turn-taking that children display in the classroom, and we see this in performance on standardized tests of a variety of different things. So, you know, in some sense, what the short version of this lecture is that interactions matter. Interactions can be assessed. Interactions can be improved. And when we improve interactions, children's learning improves. I've described these materials for both, for mostly responsive to the needs of young children in the early grades. We've done very, very similar studies with children in high school and have seen exactly the same results, that you can improve interactions, and when you improve interactions, children's learning improves. So to conclude, we think that connecting observation with professional development and feedback to teachers is a way of really moving quality up into a range in which classrooms are having a very active effect on children. It's important to reinforce that I'm not saying that all coaching and all coursework and all observation is effective. I'm saying that our approaches to coaching and coursework and observation have proven effective, and I think part of the reason that is because they're very rigorous and they're very standardized and they're very programmatic. Focused professional development around interactions can really help create experiences in classrooms that close learning gaps. So we've seen examples of how those learning gaps closed. There are lots of implications for teacher professional development and teacher preparation. I think this is an area that we're working on right now in the reform of teacher preparation and how we begin to build better assessments and tools into teacher preparation. And at the end of the day, I think we have very good evidence that we can close learning gaps for children when we focus on interactions, and we can support teachers to feel more effective and feel more connected to kids. Thank you very much. Over here? Okay. Sure, yeah.
Agradecemos a Robert Pianta por su interesante presentación y ahora tenemos tiempo para un par de preguntas que va a moderar Ernesto Treviño. ¿Alguien interesado? Acá primero y allá, acá y luego acá.
Hi. The instrument has been tried with children with special needs.
Many of the classrooms that we have visited have children in them with special needs. And so, in fact, one of the aspects of teachers' behavior that we pay attention to is the way they include children with special needs and help engage children with special needs in the ongoing activities of the classroom. That would be an aspect of teachers' sensitivity. So yes, there have been a number of studies of children with special needs, and like the other studies I described, the application of the class in those situations turns out to be very similar to the way it works in other more typical situations.
Les cuento que Robert tiene traducción, entonces en caso de que lo necesiten pueden hacer las preguntas en castellano. Acá hay otra persona interesada también, atrás, y allá habían levantado la mano también.
¿Qué hay acerca de los deberes, derechos y disciplina? ¿Es posible contemplarlas en esta etapa de los niños?
I think that's a very good question. We see in our studies, particularly with older children, not with the 4- and 5-year-olds, but with older children, the way that teachers involve children in setting rules for the classroom and understanding how they will work on discipline together is a very, very important part of what the teacher works on with the children. And in those classrooms, children learn more. They're more involved. It has to do with the dimension that I call respect for student perspectives or regard for student perspectives. That's what you're talking about is an aspect of that, is involving the children and understanding that they have a point of view.
Buenos días. Tenemos una duda respecto específicamente al entrenamiento a los entrenadores, a los coaches de los profesores. Nos gustaría saber más o menos en general sobre qué temas los entrenan, ¿sí? Y más o menos algunas pistas, algún ejemplo de cómo es ese entrenamiento a los coaches. Y nos gustaría saber que trabajan con los profesores y nos gustaría saber si algo de este nivel puede ser absorbido por las escuelas, si puede ser desarrollado por la misma escuela o necesita un apoyo externo. Gracias.
The answer is yes to all of your questions. We have actually great examples of this. So we have developed ways of training individuals, trainers, who can go out and train teachers or train other observers to conduct the observations. And so this is a way of expanding the use of the tool and training more people to be able to view things consistently. So there's a system for supporting that, and we've trained many people to do that so that there are people all over the world who can do that, some of them here in Santiago. And the coaching program is supported through an internet site that helps provide, coaches need to be trained, but it helps provide some training and support for coaches and training and support for teachers so that the coaching interactions can take place more smoothly and without a lot of inconsistency. So we've been quite successful in helping this move out into schools so that schools are able to do this work themselves.
Hola, profesor Pianta, bienvenido a Chile, aquí. Dos preguntas sobre la dimensión de apoyo emocional. La primera, ¿cuáles son los fundamentos teóricos que motivaron al equipo de investigación, ¿no es cierto?, para incluir esta dimensión que en los últimos años está teniendo mayor relevancia en la enseñanza? Esa es la primera pregunta. La otra es, ¿cuál es el rol de los procesos motivacionales? ¿Cómo despertar y generar la motivación para que el estudiante se involucre en el aprendizaje?
Again, very good questions. The emotional support dimension and that aspect of the teacher-child relationship is something that draws very heavily on attachment theory and draws from the work that largely comes from infant and child attachment to their parents and the fundamental role that affiliation and attachment plays in human development. And we took many of those ideas and applied them to teacher-child interaction. Those features, those emotional support features, are, I think, fundamentally connected to motivation. I think students and teachers find value in their work together. They are motivated to work together when they have an emotional experience that is of feeling effective and of feeling comforted, safe, and supported, and if you're a student. And it is those emotional features of the interaction that create a lot of the motivating qualities. Not all the motivating qualities, but a good part of them.
Tenemos tiempo para dos preguntas más. Acá y allá. O allá, que estaban antes.
Muy interesante la presentación. Me gustaría preguntar respecto a la experiencia que han tenido ustedes con la aplicación de este instrumento en Latinoamérica. Usted mencionó Ecuador y mencionó de cómo observaron la transversalidad del instrumento para la realidad latinoamericana, si hay algunas cosas que tuvieron que incorporar, contextualizar, y si hay algo en particular que le haya llamado la atención de la experiencia, de lo que ha podido ver en Latinoamérica o de si ha podido tener acceso a algo en Chile. Muchas gracias.
This is a very important question because when we are trying to take a description and an instrument from one cultural context and seeing if it works in another cultural context, it's very important to determine whether it actually has the same meaning. So it's very, very important to us, and very important in the U.S. I get this question in the U.S. all the time. More than I get it, actually, in other countries sometimes. We have designed the instrument to be as flexible and general as possible so that it can be, by design, applied across as many different cultural or situational or economic contexts as possible. Otherwise, it's not as useful. But that needs to be proven. So we have gone, the process is basically when we partner in Ecuador, or we've partnered with people in Chile or in Turkey, we will have a partner that works with us to do the translate, and then we back translate and translate again. We develop, we oftentimes start with training observers using, we train English-speaking observers who are bilingual in the context. We train them on English versions because we don't have versions in Turkish or versions in Chinese, and we then see, we go out and conduct observations and see if we get the same results as we would in the U.S., where higher levels are predicting higher, more improvement for children, and we also try to work very hard to determine whether observers can agree. And agree that the instrument is applicable, the translated version is applicable. So we've done this in probably 10 different countries right now, and in every case, we see very consistent results. That the process I just described, which typically ends up with a translated manual and eventually a set of training videos in that cultural context, not US videos, but Chilean videos or Turkish videos or Australian videos. It has worked very, very consistently. But we are always careful to do this process with a partner in that culture who can help us understand how to best apply it in the culture. But we have not made major changes to the instrument itself.
Tenemos tiempo para la última pregunta. Levantaron acá al centro la mano primero.
Buenos días. Acá, muchas gracias por su exposición. Me interesó mucho el coaching. Usted mostró un gráfico en la cual mostraba la influencia de los coaching en el proceso de cambio de los docentes. Y mi pregunta es, ¿qué atributos tienen aquellos coaching que logran los mejores cambios en los docentes? Eso.
We take very seriously the training and support of coaches, and we have a very organized program for coaching. Okay, so this is not a program that says, I'm going to get a lot of coaches and I'm just going to set them loose and tell them to coach. I think when we do that, then the attributes of coaches matter a lot. because there's no standard program. In our approach, you saw the attributes of coaches, they mattered, but not mattered all that much. The most important attributes of coaches is that they're very organized people, that they have to pay attention to detail, they have to understand that their job is to implement a program, and they pay attention to the details of the implementation of that program, how they engage teachers and how they keep teachers moving and engaged in the program. The coaches also need to have some experience from being a teacher, because we think that's very, very important to add their credibility as a coach. But many of our coaches have 1 year of teaching experience. In fact, it's harder to train coaches that have 10 years of teaching experiences or 15 years of teaching experience, because they bring a point of view that sometimes we have to undo in order to train them in the coaching model. It's just the way it works. But we have taken a very organized and focused approach to the coaching, so that the attributes of coaches don't matter as much as they otherwise might. They need to be nice people and be able to engage adults effectively.
Muy bien, pues nuevamente quiero agradecerle mucho al profesor Pianta por su presentación, por su disposición a contestar preguntas y bueno, también a todos ustedes por la atención que pusieron a la presentación y las interesantes preguntas. Así que vamos ahora a la siguiente presentación. Muchas gracias, Bob.
De nada. Gracias.